Ohio State University. Okay, let's welcome the speaker.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming to my talk. My name is Skylar Worcester. I'll be presenting our paper titled Neural Stream Functions by myself, Han Chigo, Tom Turka, and Hanwei Shen. This is a collaborative work between Argonne National Lab and Ohio State University. In this paper, we propose a way to use neural networks to generate something called a stream function, which is useful in flow visualization. So first I'm going to talk about some FlowViz background. There's a lot of flow visualization techniques, and one of them is called a stream surface. A stream surface is a surface that is tangential to the flow at all points in the volume. And so we get useful visualizations kind of showing the features of the flow, as you can see in the bottom right with this tornado image. The features of the tornado is the data set with the four swirling surfaces there. A common way to compute these is by placing a seeding rate, which you can see in the bottom left, which is a set of points that get affected through the vector field. And after that, you have to mesh them and create your surface to visualize. This is the so-called explicit way to generate stream surfaces. But there is also another way called the implicit approach, which can generate stream surfaces as isosurfaces of a scalar field, which is called the stream function. A lot of terms going on here, but our stream function is this 3D scalar field, and when we take a isosurface, so we do some isosurface extraction, then we can visualize those surfaces, and those are exactly stream surfaces in the flow data. In this paradigm, as opposed to the explicit approach, we do not use seeds to advect through the volume, and instead we just take these surfaces from the scalar field, and these results are stream surfaces. In this paper, we focus on a method for computing that stream function on the left side of the screen. So these stream functions are usually not given to us from simulations for DNS, for example. They actually need to be calculated or derived. So this is both expensive to compute and expensive to store, especially as the resolution of your vector fields gets larger and larger as scientists have higher computing capabilities. So we're going to talk about how to generate a stream function from some vector field data. For a stream function to be valid for a vector field, this mathematical condition on the screen must hold that the stream function's gradient at all points is perpendicular to the vector field. For some intuition about this requirement, I have a 2D example. It's actually a very simple problem in 2D. It gets harder in 3D, but maybe easier to visualize in 2D here. On the right side is an example of a 2D stream function using a color map. And in 2D, the isocontours extract stream lines instead of stream surfaces, but the idea applies to the higher dimension as well. The vector field direction follows these black isocontours, and here I added a blue line to show the orthogonal direction to these stream lines. And the blue line is exactly the gradient of the stream function, which you can see kind of points from this yellow band to the higher valued green band. So at all points in this stream function, the gradient is perpendicular to the streamlines, which satisfies our orthogonality constraint. Approaches that solve for the stream function use numerical solvers or require affecting seeds from the boundary above the domain inward using a tracing technique. The latter technique has drawbacks such that areas of circulation, recirculation will not be discovered, and all of these approaches have computation and memory challenges, which, as I mentioned, will become more difficult and scale poorly with the resolution of the data. As such, the resolution of vector fields, as they continue to grow, this will become very computationally expensive. Motivated by some of these challenges in calculating stream functions, we propose an implicit neural representation approach to solve for stream functions for a given vector field. An INR, for implicit neural representation, is a neural network that maps input coordinates to an output value, and is generally some multi-layer perceptron with some optional encoding scheme at the beginning of the network. Recently, INRs have become very popular, and maybe just the past 3 years in Soutb at least. and they've already been used to represent volumes for things like visualization, temporal super resolution, and compression within the PVIS domain. These are just a few of the papers that have come out in the last 2 years related to PVIS and INRs that I'd recommend you take a look at if you're interested in the topic. If you're also familiar with the popular NERV model in the computer vision domain, that is a specific kind of implicit neurorepresentation as well. Previous PVIS papers using INRs have a few key reasons that they use them. These models are very lightweight. They have a small storage cost compared to the value they might represent, which is why they've been used for compression already in PVIS. And also the models are meshless, so the result is not tied to the size of the resolution of the data you are working with. Instead, we can control the number of parameters in the neural network and have some flexibility over how much RAM we're using during the solution and how much it takes to store on your hard drive after you are done. So the idea in our paper is to use INRs to represent a stream function, which is another scalar field, just with these same benefits. But me saying that might raise a flag in your head because, as I mentioned, we are not given a stream function from our simulations. For example, we have a vector field from our simulations, no stream function. So how do we tell the network what to learn? In previous approaches, they have some ground truth data to teach to their neural network. But in our case, we do not have a ground truth data to teach. All we're given is the vector field and the governing equation. So with no ground truth in mind, we have to change how we train our neural network to learn a stream function. Instead of using just the scalar output of the neural network during training, actually what we do is take the gradient of the neural network implicitly using the chain rule. The chain rule allows us to take partial derivatives from within the network. This is the same technique that your PyTorch or TensorFlow is already using to compute the gradient of your loss function with respect to the network parameters. But we can also do that to calculate the gradient of the network's output with respect to the input XYZ coordinate. And so now with this gradient through the network, we have both our stream function, gradient of f, as well as our vector field v, which fits into our equation, our governing equation on the right side rather nicely. So in our training phase, we only care about this gradient. We actually do not even look at the scalar output of our neural network. We only care about the gradient because we don't know what the scalar should be. We only know the vector should be orthogonal to the vector field. And this is the biggest fundamental difference between our work and other INR PVIS works, is that we only use this gradient of the network instead of the general scalar output of the INR. So this gives rise to our proposed pipeline. A vector field is applied to the training routine, which is used to train the network, which can finally be sampled and rendered for visualizing stream surfaces. There are a few ways we can train the network to meet the constraint that we talked about, namely a few different loss functions, which I'll discuss one at a time, starting with the orthogonality loss. The orthogonality loss is a kind of direct minimization of that governing equation that I talked about. Very simply, we minimize the absolute value of the inner product between the gradient of the network and the vector field. To train the network, we sample some number of points. In this case, I use uppercase P for a set of points. And we take that batch of coordinates, pass that through the neural network, take the gradient of that with respect to the input, minimize this absolute value. I want to give some intuition about what this is telling the network to learn in a kind of geometric sense. So in this case on the right, V is our vector direction, and in 3D we have infinite directions that are orthogonal to V. This red disk that I have on the screen is our plane of orthogonal directions, right? So we're asking the network to learn any one of these infinite orthogonal directions with this loss function. So there's actually a very large degree of freedom afforded to the neural network for what direction it's allowed to figure out. Here's one example of using that approach on the tornado data set, which I showed some visualizations of earlier. Out of the infinite orthogonal directions, the network is likely learning probably one of the easier ones to solve for, as it just finds the lowest loss value in the training. In this case, it's actually a good fit. You can see we have validated with some black streamlines on the right side. And we can see that the streamline is exactly matched the stream surfaces learned by our neural network. But maybe this isn't as expressive as we want our stream surfaces to be. Comparing with the previous stream surfaces for the same tornado data set on the bottom right side, of course that was calculated with the explicit method and some seeding points. It seemed we are not seeing the same kind of curving of the flow that is shown at the bottom right. To tackle this and make some other kind of visualizations, we rely on the FRNAF frame or the TMB frame and something called principal stream surfaces. We're going to skip over some of the maths to save time, but shown by Kai and Heng in, I think, a paper from '97, stream surfaces that follow the normal direction in the FRNAF frame will follow the flow curvature and kind of give a very nice intuitive visualization of the stream surfaces. The normal direction, pointed out here on the bottom right visualization, again we have that disk of infinite infinite orthogonal directions. The normal direction is exactly one of those infinite directions. So this is a much more constrained problem to try to force the neural network to learn. But it will satisfy our governing equation that the orthogonal direction is, that the network is learning some orthogonal direction to the vector field. We adapt this idea into our approach with a PSS loss function, or principal stream surface. In this loss, instead of maximizing the orthogonality of the gradient of our network in the vector field, we want to make it parallel to n, which is exactly what this function is taking care of. This, as I mentioned, is a much more specific constraint compared to our previous loss function. So during training, we will opt to either use the orthogonality loss I talked about earlier or this PSS loss. They are one or the other. And I'll discuss the pros and cons of each. And so this is the difference we get somewhere. Here we're visualizing the two stream functions learned for the tornado data set with both the orthogonality loss on the left and the PSS loss on the right. The stream surfaces extracted with the stream function learning the PSS loss gives more of the swirling features expected from the tornado data set. The last contribution we have in this paper is to try to bridge the gap between explicit and implicit representations. As I mentioned, the explicit representations have the advantage that you can drop a seeding rake wherever you like in the volume and affect those through the volume. In the implicit approach, you generally cannot do that, but we want to try to bridge that gap by allowing you to do that with an implicit representation. We introduce a loss function here that essentially tries to train the network to force ISO value 0 to contain the stream surface going through your seeding rake of interest. So now, given a vector field and a set of seeds on the rake, we can train the network to generate a specific stream function with your surface in mind. And here we try that on the Isabel data set. When we just use the orthogonality loss in the bottom left here, we can see, again, these are maybe a little bit noisy rendered, but valid stream surfaces actually, but they don't tell us too much about the data. But if we use the orthogonality loss with the seeds loss, you use the seeds loss with either the PSS or orthogonality loss, we get a different set of stream surfaces, which we visualize on the right, and we also show that the streamlines are very nearly matching the surfaces extracted. To evaluate, we have about 8 data sets, which are small to medium in size, and we also use an angle error, which we call the orthogonality error. Essentially, we want our gradient of the network to be exactly perpendicular, so our error metric here is how many degrees off of perfectly perpendicular is our gradient. 0 is the best case, 90 degrees is the worst case. I guess I have one slide after, but I'll get to the quantitative metric in just a second. For the actual neural network model that we used, it's by Liu et al. Called NeuroComp, compressive neural representations of volumetric scalar fields. Any INR model works in this case, but this was the model that we went with, and these are some of the metrics used, or metrics from the training. Small models took about 2 minutes, and some larger models took up to 37 minutes. The average angle error is less than 1 degree for most cases, but going up to 3 degrees or 5.3 degrees in one case. And compared to Kai and Heng's previous principal stream surfaces paper, we see that we have a lower spread of error as well as a different quality of visualization in our extracted stream function. Some limitations about our paper first. The accuracy training time and GPU memory requirements should improve as INR models continue to evolve. We've seen a lot of work in INRs recently, and I think applying any one of those new papers to this technique could improve these results. Second, some solutions for stream functions are generally only assured locally and not globally. There's some more physics nuance there, and only for solenoidal flow. In this paper, we experiment with both solenoidal and non-solenoidal, but find that the visualizations created are pretty useful regardless. And lastly, there's some part of an occlusion problem, because one ISO value may extract multiple ISO surfaces, and so actually visualizing these ISO surfaces can be a challenge because many are overlapping. So there's some more work to do there. For future, we think this is a step towards using neural networks and INRs for physically interesting fields. We see some future work in also generating as perpendicular as possible surfaces, which was another, I think, 2010s era this paper. And we actually demonstrate with our model that another loss function, very similar to what we had proposed, can also generate those surfaces for flow fields. Another interesting way to go with this is to apply it to the Helmholtz decomposition for memory fields. Using INRs to learn a Helmholtz decomposition would be another useful technique. That concludes the presentation for neural stream functions, in part funded by Soutb and NSF. The code is available on GitHub, and feel free to contact me at the email address listed. I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you.
Hi, great talk. I was wondering, are there any numerical techniques to evaluate the stream function?
To evaluate, like
to compute it, to generate the stream function.
Sure. Yeah. So numerical solvers that do some sort of linear optimization can do that on a grid. Yes.
Exactly. So did you compare with them? Is your method of doing it faster, better, or what?
To what I can find, no open source solutions for this. There is a flex representation solution from a paper called Inside Fluids. We do compare with that in our paper for something called vortex tubes, which they apply their technique for specifically. Ours can also do that, and that uses DaVinci Resolve. It's a little strange. It's not code. It's within their rendering pipeline in DaVinci Resolve. But yeah, we do test to do some other conventional methods for grid-based solutions.
And what was the result? Since you didn't talk about it today.
Let me see if I have I have the slide ready. We have higher accuracy than what they show in their club's representation, but I think some of their surfaces look very good, which ours do not match. Only in some regions of the volume, though. Yeah, take a look at the paper, or we can talk after.
I see this. And I was also curious when you showed the GPU memory requirements.
Sure.
For the 512 cube model, it went up to 9 GB if I saw correctly. Could you comment on why it goes from why is it so high for a 512 cube?
Yeah, great question. So all of these models use the same architecture. We use the Liu et al. Model, and it is based on Siren. If you guys are familiar with that INR, it's very heavy on VRAM use. And actually, since we made this paper, a lot of new INRs have come out that use much less VRAM. I think that it spikes here because we have 100,000 samples per iteration. So we have increased the number of points that we're learning every iteration compared to these other ones that are down at 0.5 gigabytes. But yeah, I think with a more modern model, maybe something like hash grid encoding or something else would drastically reduce this GPU memory requirement.
And if I might ask one more, have you thought of applying similar techniques to applications outside Cybis, like maybe just for some to replace some numerical solver? If the computational scientist requires something like that?
Yeah, great question. So in part of the inspiration was Siren original paper. They actually solved it was a test problem, the Poisson equation they solved using their implicit neural representation 7. It's a very simple test problem, and it's kind of just to see about it. But in the same way, we apply training with the neural networks gradient instead of the neural networks output. So there's a larger scope of problems using neural networks to solve PDEs, and this is just like one small step for visualization specifically. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you for the question.
let's move on to the next paper.